Kia ora te whānau, ko Andrew Doubleday tēnei. Welcome to this little homily. It's for Sunday the 25th of September 2022, and we're following the lectionary gospel reading for the day, which is Luke chapter 16 verses 19 through to 31. It's an extremely well-known passage, so let's proceed. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at the gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died, and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus at his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." It's a sobering story, isn't it? It's a parable. It is actually a parable. When I was growing up, there were stories that suggested it may not have been. I believe it is, and it's tapping into Jewish mythology. It's a fable. It would have been well understood at the time. Interestingly, it's the only parable where Jesus names a character. The name Lazarus is derived from Eliezer, which means God has helped. And there's a real irony here, because God seems not to have helped. As we'll see, the invitation in the story, and this is giving the game away a little bit, is for the rich man to be God's hands and heart. But we'll get to that. This Lazarus seems to have had a thoroughly miserable existence. And yet the story also tells us that death is not the end. We find the name Lazarus in 2 Gospels. It does not appear in the synoptics at all as a historical figure, only here as a fictional figure, fictional character in this fable, this parable. It appears in John's Gospel. Lazarus is the brother of Martha and Mary, and he actually does die and is brought back to life. And here's the thing. What we discover in that account is that the religious leaders, rather than listening, wanted to kill him again, along with Jesus. It's interesting, eh? And so it sort of gives credence to Jesus' assertion at the end of the story. Neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. It is interesting. So, let's look at the story. The first thing we're confronted with is this rich man's sense of entitlement. He's dressed in purple. Now, I understood that purple dye was extremely expensive and generally reserved for royalty. It emphasizes the sumptuous living. This is a man who did not deny himself the best of everything. After all, he deserved it. He was entitled. And poverty was clearly the fault of the poor. Even we see that today, and we see it in the Christian church. We see this idea that people are poor because they haven't worked hard enough. People are poor and they deserve to be poor. It's their own fault. And in some cases this may be the case. But what we also see, and the evidence is strong, that this sense of entitlement stretches to people with inherited wealth at all as well. They also think that they're entitled in some way. And in this story, we see that the sense of entitlement stretches beyond death, even in Hades, the place of the dead. In the Old Testament Hebrew, this was a place of silence, a place of rest. The dead were not conscious. Yet Greek understanding of the underworld by the time of Jesus seems to have crept in. And here it is a place of torment. That's where we get our concept of hell from. So I want us to notice two things about what's going on here. The first thing is that this rich man's sense of entitlement persists. He still sees Lazarus as a lesser being to himself. He still regards him as a piece of property who can be directed, either to come across and serve the rich man by dipping his finger in water and cooling his tongue, or by going back to the world above and warning his 5 brothers about the fate that has met their dead brother and to change their living. That's the first thing. He still doesn't get it. He still sees Lazarus, who is now sitting next to Abraham, as less than himself. But here's the other thing, and this is even worse in many ways. He knows Lazarus' name. We notice as we read the story, it's not Abraham who says it's his name. It's the rich man. And while in the world above, he ignores Lazarus' suffering, and he has the power to do something about it. He still knows who Lazarus is and chooses to discount him as of any concern. He almost pretends that he doesn't see him until he finds himself in need of his services. And then it becomes very clear that he knows only too well who Lazarus is. This does not reflect well on the rich man, and perhaps this is the whole point of the parable. You see, Moses and the law and the prophets are very clear about the place and the care that is to be exercised toward the foreigner, the stranger, the poor, the dispossessed, the widow, the orphan, the vulnerable. It's hard baked into the law and the prophets. They have a responsibility toward them. It's part of their responsibility as this covenant community of God. And so often we see that they chose to ignore it, imagining perhaps that the responsibility belongs to somebody else. Jesus is inviting us to notice those around us that we ignore, that we take for granted, that we imagine to be somebody else's responsibility, just like the rich man here. I wonder if he pretended that he really didn't notice Lazarus, didn't see him. Well, he clearly didn't, in a sense, see him. But it was just a source of irritation to him. And while it's true that we can't fix everything. We can't take the burden of the whole world on our lives. We are invited to respond to those needs that find our way and find their way to our door. Lazarus lay every day at the gate of this man's house. He was always in the rich man's face, yet the dogs fared better than Lazarus. I wonder how often Lazarus was abused. I wonder how often he was kicked and told to move on. God is inviting us, I would suggest, to consider our own sense of privilege. The rich man is confronted on a daily basis by the desperate poverty of Lazarus, yet he does nothing. I want to suggest that God is trying to get his attention, and still he does nothing. So often the rich man in the story is me. How does the outcome change? It starts with noticing what God is doing. And what God is doing here is confronting us with this person's situation. Every day, God is at work in the rich man's life by having Lazarus come to this gate and lying there by the gate. And the man isn't getting the message. This man is being invited to be the hands of God and making a difference for Lazarus. And he's not getting the message. So the question for me is, what is it that God is confronting me with and inviting me to notice of someone else's situation? And then perhaps asking the question, what is Jesus inviting me into? Once I've noticed, what is inviting me to do? What action, what process is he inviting me to engage with relation to what I'm seeing? And then seeing where this goes from there. This is a sobering story. It's about me. It may also be about you.